Okay, you clicked on this video. You're probably wondering what in the world it's about. Well, here's your chance to unclick on this video because I'm about to talk about something that I've just been thinking about, and I think I may be the only person who thinks about it. And in general, that theme, the thing I've been thinking about is how do you get something to change, to make an impact, to last? And I specifically think about it in terms of a speaker. So think about like a TED Talk, or think about like a movie presenting a message, or think about me on YouTube talking. How do you actually get someone to change, to make something where it clicks in their brain and they think about it? How do you, when you're talking to a group of people, get them to think it's their idea? How do you make something, how do you change someone's viewpoint? So that's kind of the lofty theme of it. But I've been thinking about it in all sorts of different angles. And so this video has really no straightforward structure. It's just me thinking about it. And so if you clicked on this video and that's what you wanted, you're about to get it. If you didn't know what you were clicking on this video for, now is a good time to go ahead and click away, because I don't know where this is going to go. This is just me thinking out loud based off some notes that I wrote down. And so I think about it. When someone gives a TED Talk, or when I present a YouTube video idea, or when someone gives a movie, we typically, as the filmmaker, as the speaker, as the presenter, as the communicator, want to give the solution. There's a problem, and we want to give the solution. There is racism, so Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wants to give the solution. There is a problem in your life, and so as a YouTuber, I want to give a solution of what helped me. As a filmmaker, you see something wrong in the world, like people destroying an environment and hoppers, and then they give the solution that we should all work together and love our environment. Whatever the message is, people want to give a solution. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think about movies, they give a very convincing, satisfying answer. And maybe we don't agree with it, but it can be very satisfying. Watching people work together, or watching people do something for the greater good, or watching people with integrity, or just inspiring, cool stories. And I think about how amazing it is to watch it. And it's a very satisfying ending. But what makes like an audience actually change? What makes someone sitting in a TED Talk actually go change their life? What makes a YouTube video so effective that someone puts down their phone and goes and implements that idea? I've been thinking about that a lot. Somewhat because I've been ramping up my YouTube output, but also just thinking through in movies or life in general. How do you present something that you know is very true, and how do you present it to someone else so that they also clicks in their head and they go and do something about it and they change their life for the better? From a spiritual standpoint, I think there's not a lot we can do. We can present the facts, but it's the Holy Spirit who works within us. But outside of a spiritual standpoint, it's interesting to look at. I think about a movie or a cliffhanger that ends on a cliffhanger, or ends on an obviously wrong choice. It's so wrong, and it's a tragedy, and everyone knows something is off. And so it gets the audience fired up, even if it's not financially successful. A lot of tragedies, I think of The Godfather, a very financially successful one, where it ends on a very negative note. The guy has become a mobster, whatever, the mafia, that's what it is. And it ends on a negative note. And so in the audience's mind, it's kind of a warning. But I think of the movies that like want to make a change, and they end on just this really downer note, and they want you to feel it and grasp it, and they want to make some statement. And those typically aren't the most financially successful films. I mean, you can find a bunch of exceptions and a bunch of different ways of doing it. It's all about going about it. But in general, if I were trying to convince people to go to the moon, then you have a movie going about it. You can use the carrot. You can try and get people to get excited about going to the moon. So you tell an inspiring story that's exciting and people are like, man, let's go to the moon. It's awesome. Or you put a stick and you kind of beat them and tell them, hey, you have to go to the moon. This is terrible that we aren't. I think about, what's the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? Don't Look Up. The asteroid is coming to Earth. The filmmaker is very passionate about making sure we do something about global warming. And so he ends with the asteroid literally destroying Earth because they didn't do anything about it. He's trying to make a statement. And yet that's not as satisfying as a movie where they save the day. But which one gets an audience to change? Do any of them get an audience to change? I think about how Jesus didn't really tell people exactly what to do. He gave the Sermon on the Mount, but he told a lot of stories, a lot of parables, and he didn't really tell applications. He would leave that up to the mind of the person and see if they would come up with it. And of course, Jesus was talking about it from a spiritual angle. He wasn't just talking about basic life change. He was talking about radical, transformational spiritual change, and he was literally God, so he's going to have different skills than a man would. But it is interesting that he always told stories, and he would give a giant sermon, but for me, the things that stick are the stories, and the stories help illustrate something. And so I wonder, okay, as a YouTuber, and I want to make somebody be on their phone less, do I just tell a really convincing story? Well, is someone actually going to listen to a story on YouTube? I don't know. How do you get someone to be convincing? I think about real life change. I can't remember exactly which country. I can't remember the full story. It was in the book Power Moments. You can look it up. But there's some revolutionaries, and they were trying to overthrow the government in a very bad government. So they were the good guys in the story. And they had trained people. They had a bunch of people doing protests. They had a huge movement on their side. And they're like, how do we spark it? How do we get people fired up? And so there was going to be this big gathering, a big music festival, and they hyped up, the band that was going to be there. It was all excited. Everyone showed up to this huge festival, like New Year's Eve or something, and they were going to get everyone passionate and excited and get them fired up. And then the plot twist was they didn't actually have a band there, and they just ended it with, go do something. We're not here to celebrate. We have nothing to celebrate. We need to go take action. And so it ended on just kind of a jarring mental change of just, man, we have to go do something. And so sometimes I wonder, do I just end a YouTube video by just being really jarring? Does that actually help? Does it leave people satisfied? Would they share that? If it gets one person to change, but then doesn't share to other people, is it being effective? That's where we're at. In the Power Moments, there's also a story. There's a whole chapter about tripping over the truth. How do you get someone to realize something? And so there was a bunch of cities that had been built, and sorry, that's a totally wrong way to start it. There were a bunch of little towns that were not pooping correctly. By that, they were pooping in the streets and outside their houses. They just had no version of sanitation like we do now. And they went in, humanitarian people built outhouses, and some people used the outhouses, but typically it was maybe 40% of the population used the outhouse. Some people thought it was too nice. Other people just were used to pooping in the street. So why would you go to the outhouse when you could do it right there? And of course, there was a bunch of diseases, and there's a bunch of health concerns with that. And so a couple things they could do. One, you could come into the town and say, hey, you're being dumb. This is not safe. This is not sanitary. Present a bunch of facts, explain how to do it. Or two, you could try and, bring in a better outhouse and convince people to use the outhouse and use it correctly. But the strategy they came up with was the audience, the people are not going to change their ways unless they literally realize it themselves. And so they would create this whole very emotionally gut-wrenching process of coming into a town and just slowly pointing out all the poop, getting people to tell them where they pooped. And then they would, I'm kind of shortening the version where it's not going to be as effective, but then they would just say, okay, if you had this glass of water, would you drink it? Then he would, pull off a little hair and swirl it around in some poop and then put it in the glass of water and say, now would you drink it? And they're like, no, of course, that's poop. And then he would say, okay, how many flies do y'all see around here? And they're like, yeah, we see a lot of flies. And then just slowly keep asking questions until they realize that the flies are landing on the poop and landing on food, and these people are literally eating other people's poop. And as the gut-wrenching realization realized, and they figured it out in their own heads, they immediately would stop doing what they were doing. They had disgust. It made a radical change, and it was all done by just asking questions. And so that's something you can't really do on YouTube. You can sit and ask questions, but people don't actually engage. They aren't used to engaging on YouTube. They're used to just being told stuff. And if a video tries to get them to engage, the engagement rate's not going to be as high. And so it's not going to have as much watch time, and it's not going to share. What shares on YouTube is not what makes for good teaching and effective change. So it just makes you think. People want to hear findings, but they don't do anything about findings. We don't need to share how we came to a solution. We should share it and try and replicate the discovery. That was the whole point of Power Moments, is if somebody can replicate the discovery like you experienced it, then they're going to have the same thing. So if I have a life hack and a way to go about life and I share it with you, that's not going to change you. It might change you a little bit, and there's people who have been changed by that. Awesome, yay. But if I really want you to change, then I would get you to replicate that discovery and get you to go about the process of actually trying it yourself. And then when you discover it, you come up with the same solutions and come up with the same passion for that idea. People don't like salesmen. If we're a salesperson trying to sell you an idea, if I'm a salesperson trying to sell you on reading your Bible or doing a gratitude wall or not being on your phone as much, and I'm selling an idea, you're not going to be very passionate about doing it. We don't like salespeople. When we sell things, it's just not going to work. But a book that taught me stuff, I actually have applied it, and it was kind of a sales tactic. I bought what they were selling. But if somebody's resistant to buying what somebody's selling, then how do you go about changing people? And why is YouTube such an effective way of going about it? And if you're in an actual TED Talk, if I were talking to people in the room, would I change a different strategy? There's so many different thoughts here. People have been changed in so many different ways, but the most effective way to get someone to change is to replicate the discovery that you've discovered for yourself. And so Why do we not do that as speakers? Why do we just always give the evidence? Well, I think on YouTube there's a good reason, but in filmmaking and in an actual TED Talk or talking to people, I wonder if the reason we don't just let people replicate the discovery and don't just ask questions and don't use things to get them to discover in their head is, one, because we don't trust our audience. We like to sound smart. We like to share what we learned, and it's exciting to share what we learned and try and convince someone to do it. But to get them to replicate it in their head, we aren't sure if we trust our audience enough. Number two, I think one reason we don't actually go about this way of trying to get people to change by getting them to replicate the discovery in their heads instead of just presenting the facts is we have too big of an audience, and somebody's gonna misinterpret it. There are so many different ways to misinterpret things, especially if they're taken out of context. And if I were to share something and be very sarcastic about it, there's no way everyone's going to pick up on that sarcasm, especially with me doing it because I'm sometimes not very clear when I'm being sarcastic. I think about all the different ways you can go about sharing a message. And if you have a big enough audience, someone's going to misinterpret it. And especially depending on the subject matter, some person could really harm their life by misinterpreting it. Now, you could say it's their fault for being stupid, but as a speaker, it's your job to make sure that things go about in the right way. And so I think there's just a scared chance of being misinterpreted. And so when you're sharing in front of a large group or when you're sharing on YouTube, you just have to be careful how you go about sharing it because somebody is going to misinterpret it. And so if you aren't incredibly clear with what you're actually saying and you aren't just hoping that someone picks up on something in their head, then it's a good reason to be very careful as you're trying to share it in that way. And finally, sometimes I think you just don't need to overthink things. If you want someone to change, just share the facts. Share what you researched. Share what I believe. Just share and just be simple and don't try and overcomplicate it. I think that's the power of the gospel specifically is you don't have to overcomplicate it. You just share the good news of Jesus and let the Holy Spirit do the work. But in every other area of life, if you want to convince someone of a business idea or convince them of this or pitch this or do this or convince somebody of why you think this way to live life is best, sometimes it's best just to be simple. And sometimes you overthink everything like I just did. And really, I don't know. What should you do to get someone to change? Is there one correct way? Do you change it up a bunch of times? Do you tell a story? Do you leave it open-ended? Should you end with the facts? Who knows? It's a fun challenge to try and figure out. And that's what I think this YouTube channel a little bit is for me to just experiment and to see what is effective at getting people to change. And maybe I'll learn a couple things along the way.